welcome Coach Gene Ubriaco to episode number 2 of our special topic series. We are going to talk a little bit today about fundamentals and intangibles in the sport of lacrosse. So before we begin, Coach, do you mind just maybe introducing yourself? Who are you, and what are you doing on Gilman's campus today?
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to talking about?
Sure. Well, like I said, I'm the head lacrosse coach at Loyola Blakefield. I'm also a middle school teacher. I've been a middle school teacher for 25 years. So I definitely like the subject matter and the people that are middle school guys. They're fun to be around. I'm looking forward to being on Gilman's campus to chat with you about one of our favorite topics, which is lacrosse and coaching and fundamentals and intangibles.
Awesome. And you work with middle school guys every day, and you've done that for a while. And maybe that's where we want to go and start with this conversation is the middle school lacrosse player, and what are some skills that they need to develop as they become high school lacrosse players and get to the next level. And the first thing that I thought about before coming into the conversation today was ground balls, because for me, and my dad coaching me throughout my life and the coaches I've had, ground balls is always the number one topic of when you talk about fundamentals. It's if you can't get the ground ball up off the ground, you're not going to be any good. You're not going to have a spot on any team. So maybe we can start our conversation about fundamentals with ground balls and how important that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, just thinking about the rules of lacrosse, right? I think it's the only game where you're never guaranteed possession, right? So, every other sport, you get a possession usually when the other team scores. So lacrosse, you have to earn every possession, and that starts from the ball being on the ground. So, just from the fundamental of the sport, picking up the ball is really, really important. And I also think, other than the techniques and the fundamentals of picking up a ground ball, it also just illustrates kind of a will, right? I think when you're watching a bunch of middle school guys play any sport, the one thing that will stand out is like, who are the guys that are constantly around the ball, or who are the guys that want to go and get it? If there's a lot of sports where the ball comes to you, but lacrosse is, one where you kind of have to go get it. So I think that is definitely, obviously, a really important skill and important fundamental. And middle school guys, I think, too, is just, the ability to just play and not be so structured. I think, one of the things I wanted to talk about is just how that whole dynamic, I think, has really changed. There are just some things, I think, that unless you learn them at a young age, and middle school is that incredibly developmentally appropriate age to learn everything. Like if you don't get those things at that age, it's hard to ever become like really elite at something. Kind of like just different ways of learning things. So I think in general, ground balls are an important fundamental, but I also think developing skills a certain way through free play, and rather than just kind of learning through rote repetition.
Right. So really pick up lacrosse and getting out and playing. Really, for me, growing up, I think mini lacrosse and playing just. I think back to the Final Four weekends where you're tailgating and you're out there just playing around mini lacrosse, and that happened in my neighborhood a little bit. But when I do lessons with younger kids now, middle school guys or even younger than that, I just bring out the mini lacrosse goals and just break up into teams and kind of just play pickup, because I agree with what you're saying is that's where you can kind of learn the game a little bit more, learn the movements, learn how to move off ball. Kind of practice the will on the ground that you're talking about. I think that's lost a little bit in today's kind of organized, structured game.
I agree completely. I mean, my youth lacrosse experience consisted of, one of my good friends who coaches in this league with me, Andy Hilgartner. We played 3x lacrosse in his backyard pretty much every day of the summer, and I think, the shift from fluency to accuracy, like when you're just, and I'm not disparaging, going on a wall and practicing and doing that, but that's a very, you can almost turn your brain off and do that, like driving a car. You're not really thinking about what you're doing, but when you're playing 3x, you're very active with your brain, so I think being able to assess context and playing against other people, I just think that's such a better way to learn. And I think sometimes as coaches, especially at the high school level in this competitive league that we play in, you almost feel like you're not practicing if you're playing like some small games. But honestly, for development, that's really the way to do it, in my opinion.
For sure. When you watch middle school guys or younger guys and try to get a sense of if they can make it to the next level and stand out at the next level, what are some other facets of their game that you are looking for? So maybe it's the tenacity on the ground and their ground ball play, but what are some other intangibles or fundamentals that you think are really the most important to translate to the high school level?
Yeah, I think the ability to just make others better, and that's a really hard thing to do. But again, someone who's willing to go and pick up a ground ball and then just move it to the next guy. Someone who is charismatic enough that their presence inspires others. And I think that's an important trait, especially with young guys. Again, I've watched so many recesses over my time, and you see all that stuff happen right there. It's really fascinating to watch a bunch of kids when adults are not organizing their lives and telling them what to do. They somehow manage to pick the teams, usually pick pretty fair teams, and so I think learning, you can see leadership skills doing that as well. But I think anytime the guys are doing free play, and anytime you're playing against someone else, it just allows you to assess context. I mean, I think there's two ways that you learn something permanently. Like, for example, someone just told me the other day that the game tag is an acronym that stands for touch and go. And I never knew that. And it fascinated me mentally so much that I know I'll never forget that, right? So I think the best way to put stuff into your brain from a skill and fundamental perspective is to bring it in through your brain, right? And that's the way you see things, the way you assess things. So look, again, I think there's a need for rote fundamentals, obviously, right? Like, you have to have certain core competencies in any sport or any endeavor to be able to be very good at that endeavor. But I also think the way you develop fluency versus accuracy is through competing and doing it with others in an unscripted nature.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things about the game of lacrosse is the creative element. And you can tell middle school guys to hit the wall every day and do these certain things in order to get better, but it's really, in my view, the guys that are willing to take a risk and pick up a new non-conventional skill and practice that and be able to work that into their game are the ones that really succeed at the next level. I think of like a guy like Ryder Garnsey and watching him play. He's not a very big dude, but he's one of the most exciting guys to watch play because he's just worked so many different creative elements into his game. Or Lyle Thompson, like they've taken the sport and the ability to change your stick and practice a new skill, and they're able to do that at the next level against bigger guys, more athletic guys maybe.
Yeah, and again, like, I think that's a character trait too, because to kind of if you kind of come up through a rigid system of being taught by someone who may yell at you if you try and do something that's a little bit creative, a lot of times guys won't do that again. They learn that, oh well, I better not do that, right? But I think in so many ways, the environment that you are learning in, the environment that you're being coached in and instructed in, creates that ability, right? And if you think about all the Canadian players that are so impactful in like the college games that you watch every weekend, the environment they play in is typically indoors in box lacrosse, where the ball doesn't go out of bounds. There's always your rebounds. There's different angles that you have to throw the ball in order to catch it and receive it. There's different angles you got to shoot to get it past the goalie. So I think that environment creates that need for unscripted and creative ways to do things. And I think the more structure you bring into things, for example, there are so many fundamentals, quotes that over the years as a player that, I've had coaches tell me, but then you watch games on Saturday and, well, that face-off guy just picked up that ground ball one-handed like 8 times in a row because he's pinch and popped it and he's going for a fast break. And the only way Grant Ament got that pass through to the other side is, he had to drop the head of his stick like Patrick Mahomes does when he throws football. So, those are almost new fundamentals. So I think it's really important that the environment that you're training in and learning in supports that creativity, because that is one of the great things about lacrosse is it's so fun to play because of that creativity. And I think the more that you can learn those things and be willing to try them and not be afraid to be great, that's, I think, the fear of failure is obviously a lot of people have that fear, but I think it's a greater fear of being great. Is a fear that more people have. That's more an intense fear, because it really, to do that, you're going to have to be willing to fail a lot in order to become great.
Right. It's definitely a risk to throw that sidearm pass or, shoot it underhand, but it's like any kind of artistic craft. And I've talked about this before in the context of maybe like art or painting. Like once you master the fundamentals, once Grant Ament masters the overhand to the ear pass, then he can start doing the sidearm and the more creative aspects. But until he kind of gets, and you tell me if you agree with this, until he gets that perfect overhand pass, he's probably not going to be able to throw the sidearm pass, because you'll see middle school guys come out and try to do that, and it doesn't work. You can't do that. Throw it overhand first.
No, I agree. Like those are the, you have to, like I said, you have to have some core competencies in order to be to try those other things. It's just like the crawling before you walk and run. You got to eat off the kids menu for a little bit before you get to get onto the the fancy menu. And but I think again, the way that you can develop those skills is through experimentation and just being allowed to try. And I think that's so important to kids' development, is being allowed to try things and not being so worried about a negative outcome. Because I think in general, kids are much more, they struggle to cope with those things a lot more now than, because I just think, as adults, sometimes we try and take all roadblocks out of their way just because we love our kids, and but subsequently, because of that, they don't necessarily develop those skills on how to overcome when things don't work out. So I think it's good to let kids try things within reason, obviously.
Do you think, from your vantage point, are kids less willing to take a risk in the game of lacrosse now than maybe previously?
I 100%. There are, typically when we practice, there are a lot of times where you have to put a condition in, like, guys, I want you to take some risk here, okay? I want you to throw it inside. Like, it's okay. We're trying to establish a style of play, all right? And it really takes the coaches kind of swallowing their whistle a little bit and swallowing their, to get that kind of style, you have to live with a little bit of sloppiness. It's like anything, right? If you're always measuring twice and cutting once, you don't maybe have as many of mistakes. But if you're trying to maybe play a little bit more freelanced and a little bit more creative and unscripted, you may have a few more mistakes that you have to tolerate.
I wonder if that's also maybe a product of the college game today. Just watching it is very scripted, I think, and it's like if you watch games from the 80s or the 90s, it's up and down, it's fast paced. Guys are trying certain things, they're trying different passes. Where today there's a lot of coaching going on, which is necessary too. I guess you have to coach that way in order to compete and cherish your possessions and make the most of every opportunity. But at the same time, you're losing a lot of that creativity that is so exciting about the sport, I think.
Yeah, and again, obviously, coaching is a profession, right? So at the college level, it's about wins and losses. And let's be honest, it's much easier to probably have total control over your group and have 30 stormtroopers out there that are all gonna, kind of look the same, do the same things, always make the safe play. It might be an easier way to produce winning outcomes with certain teams and certain rosters. I think of, like you mentioned, in the 80s, watching Syracuse play in the 80s, and Roy Simmons, who just was kind of, he was an artist, and he'd kind of sit on the sideline, and those guys just kind of enjoyed playing lacrosse at Syracuse.
Roll the ball out.
Yeah. And subsequently, they got some of the all-time greatest legends that played in that program, So, again, that just gets back to, I think the environment creates the outcome and the product, and the environment that you're, not only that you're coached in, you're trained in, and the environment that you're competing in.
When you watch high school or college players, or even when you watch any players today, what are some of the intangibles that you look for? So some of the characteristics of players' games that might not be able to be instilled through coaching, but are just kind of natural to a player. So maybe that creativity, that element is one of those intangibles. But what are some of the other things that you just can't coach?
Yeah, I think, again, just a will, right? Like a will to win, and a will to compete. I think those jump off the page. Watching games on the weekend, watching high school games, you can see, like, some players, you can feel them play, and I think when you have a player that is competing at that level, that you cannot help but feel that guy play and his impact on the field. So I would say just a desire, right? I think desire is really hard to, coaches say often, you can't coach want to,
Mm-hmm.
And so having a strong desire, I think, is a really, really important intangible in a player in any sport. A joy, playing with joy. Again, you can tell guys when you watch them play, you can feel their intensity, but sometimes you can also feel their joy and the spirit that they play with, and that's just infectious.
Mm-hmm.
And subsequently, if you're playing with maybe fear in your heart, or worry, that's also infectious, and that kind of bleeds to the whole team.
Mm-hmm.
Courage, I think courage is something that's really, really important. I would say fearfulness and I don't even know if laziness is a word in our vernacular anymore, but I think those are two human traits that are really hard to dissipate, So I think someone who plays with a lot of joy, a lot of spirit, a competitive nature, is courageous. And courageous doesn't mean that, you don't have fear. It just means that you're willing to maybe do something anyway, even despite your fear, right? Mm-hmm. Your hesitancies. And then I would say the last thing is just a charisma, being a great teammate, someone that all of the other guys know that you have their back, and that you're going to do whatever it takes to not only help the team win, but make them better. And I think that's there's no greater compliment than to be called a great teammate, because I think it encompasses all of those things.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a great one. I wrote that down. I wrote down communication too, because that's something that I think goes underlooked a little bit in the sport, especially at the younger levels. Is you don't hear much talk, and in college, it's like if you're not out there talking and communicating with each other, you're going to be completely out of the loop and off, not on the same page. So I think communication is underlooked a little bit. But
I agree.
Yeah.
If you just watch a college team practice or warm up versus like a high school team, it's like you're dealing with a completely different experience. It's so loud watching a college team, celebrate everything too. Just
Right.
Not just the communication that's necessary to being efficient, but just the hooting and hollering and the celebrating of every little thing, like a great shot, a great pass, a nice ground ball,
Yep.
And all that stuff is all part of lifting the group,
Yep.
collectively.
That goes right into excitement too. And I was thinking about this weekend, I was watching Matt Moore play, and he grew up kind of near me outside Philadelphia, went to Garnet Valley, and I think I was a senior and he was a freshman, and we played against Garnet Valley, and we always knew that he was going to be an absolute stud. But watching him against Loyola this weekend, you can see his excitement and his will for the ball. He's almost like begging to get the ball in his stick and moving around and hunting the ball. So I think that's something that almost can't be coached, is, wanting the ball.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and listen, he might be, I was talking about fluency earlier. I mean, he might be one of the most fluent lacrosse players there is. I mean, he's two-handed. He can run. He can pass. He played midfield, I think, in high school. He's converted now to an attackman at Virginia. He had, I think he was the first guy to have 40 goals and 40 assists, in Virginia's history. So he's just, he has all of those core competencies to a level that he's a fluent lacrosse player, and he certainly makes others better. Virginia, when he's playing, is a different team, and even though he has that kind of will and desire and ability to take over the game, he does play within he plays within the game. It almost never feels like he's injecting himself, but that at any time, if they really need him to, he can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he forces a little bit, but he really lets the game come to him, and he operates in that system. I totally agree with that. In terms of like toughness and grit and on ground balls, just going back to that point, do you think grit, toughness, that's something that you can coach, or is that's just who wants it? It's just kind of a natural instinct out there.
Yeah, I think. Look, I think you can coach. Like, again, there's guys that just have a tremendous amount of whatever you want to call it, grit or dog in them. They just have this desire to make all the little tough plays, right? And I think that's definitely in you or not in you. But I also do think that you can, you can train yourself to effectively be a little bit more gritty, even if it's not necessarily in your nature. Just by running full speed. Sometimes I think it's not because guys have a lack of want to, but again, I think the way you process what's going on in the field and the immediacy with which I need to react to that, or I think you can play tougher than you are. I know plenty of times we've had conversations with guys who are like, listen, just fake it till you make it. You're a big guy, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the toughest guy in the world, but because you're a bigger guy, and there might be some guys that judge you as being tough because you're big. If you just kind of scrap it up a little bit more, you might come up on the better end of things every once in a while. But I do think it's it's something that's inherent. And again, there's plenty of players that I've coached over the years that are outwardly aggressive, and that can be, I don't want to say misconstrued as being tough, but then there's also guys that are incredibly resilient tough, and that's I think of I coach Wells Stanwyck, and that guy was the tough. He never missed practice. He got so physically beat up every time he would play because he was 5'10", 165 pounds, and he wasn't incredibly fast, but just always put himself in harm's way. And so, I don't think anyone would maybe consider, you watch Ryan Tarafenko play and you're like, wow, that's a tough lacrosse player. Absolutely. If you watch John Nostrant play back then, that's a tough lacrosse player. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you said, well, Wells Stanwyck, like, he's a tough lacrosse player, really, really resilient, durable, willing to take a hit to make a play. Right. And that's a toughness as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that's even, not fading behind the goal and taking a step to the doorstep, knowing that you're going to take a hit, right? That's a minor thing, but that shows toughness too. I remember my coach in college, he would freak out if you ever faded behind the net when you're scoring. Not because it's not a great shot, not that you can't put it in with a lower angle, but it just kind of shows a little bit of weakness that you're not willing to pay the price.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some other things that you brought in that you wanted to maybe talk about in terms of just fundamentals and trying to teach some of these younger guys how to play the game? Because I think in middle school and in high school too, obviously, like parents kind of look at the box score, and they, the first question they ask you when you get in the car is how many goals did you score, right, and how many assists did you have. But there's so much more to the sport that I don't think people really know about or understand.
Yeah, I would say probably the number one thing I tell more players more than anything else is there are so many ways to impact the game, okay? And right now you're only focusing on one way to impact the game, right? So like, let's say as an attackman, obviously attackmen, they get a lot of points, right? They score and they get a lot of assists, but there's so many ways to impact the lacrosse game as an attackman, right? As a tenacious rider, as someone who's going to run shots out, someone who is going to make a hockey assist, right? So I think sometimes obviously it's easier to focus on the stuff that produces a lot of the kind of highlight and social media culture, but I think thinking about all those other ways that you can impact the game is really, really important. From a midfield standpoint, just making sure that you're picking up ground balls, you're between the restraining lines, you're carrying the mail, bringing it from one end to the other end, head manning the ball, getting in front of the ball, just finishing your cut. So you have to take someone with you, which opens up a skip lane, for someone else to score a goal. So like, there's so many different ways to impact the game, right? Other than just stuff that's measurable or stuff that gets in the stat sheet. So I think that's really important. I also think too, like, just understanding that fundamentals are really like also concepts, rather than just a technical skill, and I think there's so many. Lacrosse has become so much more complex in how it's schemed these days, just understanding how to, like, for example, like, I know when I was growing up playing lacrosse, working on that offhand so that your offhand was as good as your dominant hand. I mean, yeah, that's definitely important, but it's also clearly been, shown by one-handed players that you can be equally as effective. So, I think the concept of learning how to impact a game, whether you're two-handed or one-handed, like, how do I get back to my natural side? How do I get back to the middle of the field? Learning all those things, I think that's important. And again, just the more opportunities you can. You think about basketball. Basketball guys, typically what they do is they play pickup. They get together and they play pickup basketball. And basketball and lacrosse are really, really similar. Now, football is an incredibly scripted sport. Tough to get 11 dudes together to play football, right?
Right.
But lacrosse, again, is a sport that maybe you don't get 11 guys or 10 guys together, but you can play some of those smaller games. 3x is a great way, and as much time as you can get playing box is important. It's because the environment creates a lot of different skills for you. So I think that's important. And again, at the end of the day, one of the things we tell our guys a lot is, like, there's the animals that live in the zoo and the animals that live in the jungle. And the ones in the zoo, they learn what to do maybe every day, but like, they don't really know and understand how to fully be that animal, because they're not in the wild, they're not reading context, they're not having to do things that is different every single day. So again, I think we try and let our guys be pretty creative, within reason, obviously. We're not just tossing the ball all over the playground, but I'm definitely, you got to coach the way that you are as a person. I'm not a big time screamer. I think if you're yelling at kids, you've kind of run out of good ideas. So I think a lot of the creativity does come from the environment that you're in.
For sure. I think at every level of the game, confidence is such a huge part of success on the field. And if you lack the confidence out there for some reason, what are some ways that you can gain confidence? And I always say that it's more time on your own, practicing your skills and getting comfortable with your stick, because your stick it's the biggest part of the game. If you're not comfortable with your stick and your stick isn't your best friend, then you're going to be uncomfortable on the field.
Yeah.
But what are some ways that guys can gain some confidence? Because you see that a lot, especially at the higher levels or in a competitive league like the MIAA when everyone is good, it's hard to kind of have the mindset that I'm the best out here, which you kind of need if you're going to contribute.
Yeah. I mean, I think of confidence as like an equation of it's self-belief times successful outcomes, right? And so like you try and feed both ends of that equation. So, sometimes if you don't have a lot of self-belief, well, what are ways that you can improve that? Well, set little small benchmarks for yourself, and even if they're on a simple skill, right? And once you reach that benchmark, that's naturally you should feel a little bit positive about your self-belief because you achieved something, and so you start with just little benchmarks, little small goals, and that could help your self-belief. Obviously, again, having people around you or the environment that you're being instructed in, if you're given a little bit of some positive feedback, that also does help your self-belief, right? Now, positive outcomes you can't always necessarily control, but I think that's, again, it's really important to be, like, I think when you talk about competing and with younger kids, it's so important that they are competing in an environment that gives them an opportunity to have some successful outcomes at the level they are currently. So there's this Hungarian philosopher guy, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he has this like flow theory. It's called the theory of optimal experience, and he talks about like when you're doing something that is so enjoyable that just doing it gives you the happiness, it's where your skill level meets the challenge level, and I think, again, in youth sports, everybody wants to be competing at the highest level they can for whatever brand that is, when maybe their skill level doesn't meet that challenge level, and that's really never going to help your confidence. So I think the only way you build confidence is try and work on that equation. So successful outcomes times self-belief, do small little things that help you lead to bigger and successful outcomes.
Love that advice. And we had something similar. It might be the same philosopher. Zone of proximal development maybe is the same thing. It's like when you're stretching your comfort zone, but you're still feeling like you're in the right place and you're in that flow state, and that's the best place to be in. You can tell when someone's in that area because they have, like Matt Moore, the confidence that they want the ball. They know that they're going to beat their man and be able to contribute. Yeah,
I agree. And again, the season officially starts on Monday, and there's a lot of conversations that that need to be had with kids who are trying out. And then, like, again, we really do try and put guys in a place where their current state of skill and ability matches the competition level and the challenge level where they're going to be. And so, if that's the case, it may not be what they ultimately want, but the experience will be a better one for them.
Another way that I think guys can develop their fundamentals and really their all-around game is watching lacrosse, and that's something that I did a lot of growing up because it was always on TV, and guys around here in Baltimore, you have games. I mean, maybe not this season, you can't go to games, but typically you can go to games, you can watch players. For guys that are watching lacrosse, I feel like there's a right way to watch the game so that you can use what you're seeing and take it and use it in your own game. What advice maybe would you give to players as they're watching these college games and watching these PLL games so that they can translate some of the higher level plays and skill sets into their own game?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe you watch kind of positionally, like if you're a defender, watch how the defenders align themselves, depending on where the ball is on the field. I think the other thing too, you talk about watching games. I think the way kids consume the games these days is they watch a lot on their phone, and they'll watch like little segments of the game versus watching the whole game. And I think, if you're trying to watch to learn, it's really important to actually watch the whole game, or at least watch larger portions rather than snippets of the game. I know, watching offensively, the camera tends to focus on where the ball is, but watching off the ball, seeing how the players are moving, in relation to every pass, seeing how the field's balancing. Watching substitutions is really interesting too, because you can learn kind of, how teams can gain advantages doing that. But I think also, if you watch as a fan too, you can still glean a lot of important factors from that too. And I think it's, kids can learn a lot from getting to a lacrosse game live too. And unfortunately that, isn't something that, we've been doing a lot lately, but watching it can be good. But I think if you can even get to a game live, because you can hear a lot of things on the sidelines. You can see a lot of times how guys react. It's always interesting. Like I know, like from a coach, when I watch our film, I can rewind the plays all I want and just say, well, he was in the wrong spot, or he didn't do this, he didn't do that. But I also like watching, like, what are the 2 seconds after you just made a great play? Like, what's your body? What do you do? What are the 2 seconds like after you just turn the ball over? I know, are you getting right back in the hole, or are you, is there a second delay there where it's like, my bad, or like, so those things are really valuable to learn too, and those are some of those intangible things, like, watch in a game, like watch how this guy reacted after, he took this shot, or watch how he, just next play thinking, like he made one bad play, but he just on to the next play,
Yeah, those intangibles for sure. And when you're talking about the noises, like the communication part, I think is so much greater at the next level, that you can really get a sense of how much guys are talking if you're actually there. And then that other intangible is, like, how do you react to a mistake? Because you're gonna make a mistake. You're gonna throw the ball away. You're gonna miss a ground ball. You're gonna miss a shot on the doorstep. What are you gonna do next that maybe the camera doesn't always pick up on TV?
Yeah, I mean, I watched Army and Syracuse yesterday, and Syracuse was clearly the team that was supposed to win. They were the team that was very, very hyped. And Army, every single guy on their team just literally has a next play mentality. They just, there's no, it's just, it was so fun to watch them play. Mm-hmm. All those things that we had talked about earlier. They play with so much joy in their heart, reckless abandon, absolutely no fear. They make a mistake, whatever, next play, and you watch how their success and that attitude weighed on Syracuse when that scoreboard started ticking up, and then all of a sudden you could almost feel the Syracuse guys like, hey, we're not supposed to be losing this game. We're more talented. We have maybe more show ponies than they do. But again, that was a really awesome game to watch from a coach's perspective, because I think we would all love our teams to play the way Army played yesterday against Syracuse.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. That's just another intangible, is that mindset going into a game. Even if you're stacked like Syracuse, like, you can't think really for a second that go light or take it for granted in any game. Coach Yu, thank you very much for coming on today. Maybe towards the end here we can talk a little bit about Ascension and what you and Coach Nostrant are doing with Ascension Lacrosse. We can for sure do another podcast episode, but just to give some people an idea of what Ascension Lacrosse is, I'm sure some people have seen it on social media, and it falls hand in hand with what we're talking about here, is the fundamentals and the intangibles and the ability to play without kind of gripping your stick too much and thinking too much about, if I throw this pass, am I going to get pulled out of the game, or am I going to lose the game for my team? I think Ascension is a model that's completely different from that mindset.
Yeah, honestly, it's one of the it's the coaching I really love doing the most, and I think John had started it in Pennsylvania, and when he relocated down here, we had discussed it, and I was right away I wanted to be involved with that, and Andy Hilgartner's come on board now too as well, and really it's just focusing completely on player development. There's a lot of different outlets for kids. There are high school teams and their school teams, obviously. That's great because of the camaraderie and the competition. And then, your club teams are helpful for maybe exposure for you as a player in perhaps your recruiting process. But, Ascension's all about just getting better in an environment where, you're not going to sit on the bench. Coach Nostrant and I don't have to decide, who the first midfield's going to be, who's the second, who's getting cut, we don't have to, we're not talking about recruiting with, so it's really just about taking a lot of the things that we've talked about today, fundamentals, maybe newer fundamentals, maybe some of these more creative aspects of the game, and having good training sessions that are completely focused on that, just player development. So we try and focus on like speed of mind, speed of hand, speed of foot, and those are the kind of things that we do at an Ascension clinic. And honestly, the response has been great, and it's been a whole lot of fun too.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed helping out with that, and just seeing guys play a little bit looser, more free. I think how the game is supposed to be played, and then they can develop that confidence, like what we were talking about earlier, and bring it to their club teams or their school teams, and that makes an impact. And it's more fun to watch them, whether it's at a school in the MIAA too. It doesn't really matter. It's fun to watch and compete against guys that are playing freely, the way that we like.
Completely. And again, we talked about confidence, right? And so much of kids' confidence are tied to outcomes. And when you come and do an Ascension training, there is no outcome other than, are you a better version of yourself than when you came in? And like, you just can't help but feel like, yeah, I am. And so like, it is great for their confidence. And, it's not tethered to a scoreboard or an outcome in that way.
And there's so much knowledge there with you, Coach Hillgardner, Coach Nostrant, some of the other coaches that show out for that. I know I learn a ton from coaching with you guys, so I think kids can really take a lot from those sessions too.
Yeah, it's been great, and we're looking forward to keeping it rolling.
Awesome. Coach, thanks so much for coming on. Special Topics, episode number 2. Hope to get you back in here as the season goes along this year.
Thank you, Coach. Appreciate it. It's been fun.